I'm Maeve Sandoval, 46, and I came up in the Navy from the very bottom, an enlisted dog handler who earned her commission the hard way and never once stopped being underestimated. For years, I gave this uniform everything I had, including carrying a wounded dog out of a place neither of us should have walked away from. But when a young SEAL lieutenant looked at me in a crowded officers' club and decided he already knew exactly who I was, the truth arrived in a way none of us saw coming. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who never bothered to look twice? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand quietly in the truth after someone wrote you off, hit that like button and subscribe. The night before I took command at Norfolk, I could not sleep, so I laid my service dress over the back of a chair and stared at it the way you stare at a thing you spent your whole life walking toward. 4 gold stripes on each sleeve. A small case on the dresser with 2 medals in it that I almost never wore where people could see them. Outside the window, the base was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists on a military installation after midnight, when the day shift is asleep and the night watch is keeping its voice down. I had been awake for hours, and I knew myself well enough to know I was not going to win that fight. So I got up. I have learned that there is no point arguing with a sleepless mind. You feed it or you fight it, and fighting it never works. I pulled on a plain coat over a plain shirt, nothing that said who I was or what I did, and I decided to walk to the officers' club for a cup of coffee, because the club kept a pot going late, and because I wanted to be somewhere with a little warmth in it before the biggest morning of my career. I want to tell you about that walk, and about what waited for me at the end of it, because it taught me something I had spent 28 years learning the hard way, and an old dog taught it to me in about 3 seconds. My father drove a truck for most of his life. Hollis Sandoval, long hauls and short ones, a man with hands like worn leather, and a way of telling the truth that left marks. He was not cruel. I need you to understand that, because the easy version of the story makes him a villain, and he was not one. He loved me in the careful, sideways way that hard men love their daughters. But when I told him, the summer I turned 18, that I was joining the Navy, he set down his fork at the kitchen table and looked at me for a long moment. And then he said the thing I would carry for the rest of my life. "You're a good kid, Maeve," he said. "But that uniform is for a different kind of person. Don't break your heart on it." He did not say it to wound me. He said it because he believed it, the way he believed that winter would be hard and that the bank would always win. To him, people like us did the work, and people like them wore the medals, and that was simply how the world was arranged. I did not argue with him. I had already signed the papers. I just finished my dinner and washed my plate and went to bed. And 3 weeks later, I was standing on a yellow line at boot camp while a woman half my size screamed at me about the state of my rack. We did not have much money growing up. My mother passed when I was 11, and after that it was my father and me in a small house at the edge of a small town, and he did the best a grieving man knew how to do, which was to keep the lights on and the truck running and his grief somewhere I could not see it. He was not a talker. The longest conversations we ever had were about engines and whether the bank was going to be reasonable, which it never was. I learned to read him the way you learn to read weather, by the small signs, by the set of his shoulders when he came in off a long haul. And I think that early education in reading a quiet man is part of what made me good at reading a quiet dog later on. Both of them tell you everything. Neither of them tells you with words. I joined the Navy because I wanted to be somewhere that judged me on what I did. That is the simple truth of it. In my town, you were who your family was, and my family was a tired man, and a dead woman, and a girl who was expected to marry young and stay close. I did not want to be who my family was. I wanted a clean sheet of paper and a chance to write something on it that was mine. I did not have the words for that at 18. I just had a recruiter's card and a stubbornness I had inherited from the same man who told me not to break my heart on it. I did not wash out in a year. I want you to know that, because for a long time it was the only thing keeping me upright. I made it through, and then I made it through the next thing, and the next. And somewhere in there I stopped doing it to prove my father wrong, and started doing it because I had found the place I belonged. The place I belonged turned out to have 4 legs. I qualified as a military working dog handler when I was 20. I had not planned it. I had filled out a form because a chief told me I had the temperament for it, and I had no idea what that meant until I was standing in a kennel at 6 in the morning with a leash in my hand and a German shepherd looking up at me, deciding whether I was worth his time. That is the thing nobody tells you about working dogs. They do not care what your last name is. They do not care that you are a woman in a job that men have always assumed was theirs. They do not care about your rank or your record or the opinion your father formed about you across a kitchen table. A dog decides whether you are worth following based on exactly one thing, which is whether you are worth following. You cannot fake it. You cannot order it. You earn it, and then you keep earning it, every single day, for as long as you both live. That first dog was a German shepherd named Tess, and she was not an easy animal. She had been through 2 handlers before me, and both of them had tried to bully her into obedience, and both of them had failed, because Tess had decided early in her life that fear was a poor substitute for respect, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. The chief who assigned her to me did it as a kind of test. He wanted to see whether the young woman everybody underestimated would do any better with the dog everybody had given up on. I did not know that at the time. I just knew that I had a difficult dog and a lot to prove, and that the 2 facts had a way of pointing in the same direction. It took me 4 months to earn Tess. 4 months of showing up before dawn, of doing the unglamorous work, of never once asking her for something I had not already given her 10 times over. And then one ordinary morning, she did a thing she had never done, which was to come and lean her shoulder against my leg while I was talking to the kennel master, casually, like it was nothing, like she had not just handed me the only promotion that ever truly mattered to me. I had to turn away so the kennel master would not see my face. I learned more about leadership from that first dog than I did from any school the Navy ever sent me to. I learned that you go first. I learned that you do not ask for anything you have not already given. I learned that loyalty is not a feeling, it is a series of decisions made over and over in the cold and the dark when nobody is watching. I learned that the surest way to lose the respect of something worth respecting is to demand it instead of earning it. Every officer I ever became, I became because a difficult shepherd taught me the lesson first. I carried all of that with me as I walked across the base that night. 46 years old, a captain in the United States Navy, with a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star sitting in a case back in my room and not one of them on my coat. I could see the lights of the club ahead, warm and yellow against the dark. I could hear, faintly, the sound of men laughing. I did not know yet that the room had already decided who I was. I did not know that the decision was wrong and that the only one in the building who knew the truth was lying by the fireplace with a gray muzzle and a body full of old scars, waiting, though neither of us knew it, for me to walk through the door. I should tell you how I earned the medals, because the story does not make sense without it, and because the dog who waited for me that night was the reason I had one of them at all. When I went up for my commission in 2004, I sat in front of a board of officers, most of whom had never carried a rucksack farther than the parking lot. I was a first-class petty officer by then, 24 years old, with a Purple Heart already on my record from a compound clearing the year before that had gone bad in a hurry. One of the officers on that board, a commander with soft hands and a hard mouth, asked me whether I really thought an enlisted dog handler had any business in the wardroom. He asked it the way you ask a question you have already answered for yourself. I told him the truth. I told him that I had spent 6 years learning how to lead something that could not be ordered to follow me, and that I suspected it was harder than leading people who had to. The room went quiet. The hard-mouthed commander did not like me, but the captain at the center of the table wrote something down, and 2 months later, I was an ensign. The doubt did not end there. The doubt never ends. It just changes uniforms. 11 years later, in 2015, I was a lieutenant commander on a deployment I am still not allowed to describe in detail, attached as a ground force officer to a naval special warfare task unit in a part of the world where the dust gets into everything you own and never leaves. That is where I met Petty Officer Danny Cobb. Cobb was 22 years old, and he had the best dog I had ever seen. A Belgian Malinois named Argo, green-eyed, lean as a whip, with a work ethic that bordered on the supernatural. The first time I watched Argo clear a building, I forgot to breathe. He moved like water, finding the low ground, like the building was a problem he had already solved and was simply walking me through. Cobb loved that dog the way I had loved my first one, completely and without embarrassment, and when he caught me watching them work, he grinned at me with all the ease of a kid who did not yet know how much the world could take. "Ma'am," he said, He's smarter than me. Just tell him what you want and get out of his way. I liked Cobb immediately. He reminded me of myself at that age before the world had finished teaching me its lessons, when I still thought that being good at the job would be enough to make people see you. He came from a town not unlike mine, from a family not unlike mine, a single mother who had worked 2 jobs to keep him fed and who wrote him letters in a careful hand that he kept folded in the chest pocket of his uniform. He showed me one once, embarrassed and proud at the same time, his mother's handwriting telling him to eat enough and to come home safe, and that she was proud of him in a way that the rest of the town would never understand. I think he showed it to me because he had figured out, in the way that perceptive young people do, that I was the kind of officer who would understand a mother like that, having needed one. I made a point of checking on him and the dog when I could. On a base full of operators who looked at a female officer and saw an administrative inconvenience, Cobb and Argo were easy company. The dog took to me in the way working dogs sometimes do, a brief acknowledgement, a willingness to lean his shoulder against my leg when his handler was busy, nothing more. I did not think much of it at the time. I should have. Dogs know things before we do. The patrol that changed everything went out on an ordinary morning. I will not give you the details that are not mine to give. What I can tell you is that it went wrong fast, the way these things do, that the quiet turned into noise in the space of a single heartbeat, and that when the noise stopped, Danny Cobb was gone, and his dog was pinned beside his body in a place that no one wanted to go back into. I was the senior officer on the ground. There is a version of leadership that stays in the rear and signals concern. I have never been able to make that version work in my own hands. I went back for them myself. I went back for a dead boy and his living dog, because the boy could not carry himself out and the dog would not leave him, and because some part of me that I do not fully understand could not stand the thought of either of them lying out there alone. I carried Danny Cobb out first. Then I went back for Argo. The dog was wounded and frightened, and he had every reason in the world to take my arm off at the elbow. And instead he let me lift him, 60 pounds of muscle in terror, and he pressed his head into my chest, and he did not make a sound the whole way back. I have carried a lot of heavy things in my life. I have never carried anything heavier than that dog, and I have never put anything down with more reluctance. They gave me a bronze star for it, with the small bronze letter V that means the thing was done under fire. I have never once looked at that medal and felt proud. I look at it and I think of a 22-year-old who told me his dog was smarter than he was, and who was right, and who is buried now under a white stone in a quiet field a long way from the dust. I think of a mother's careful handwriting folded in a chest pocket. I think of all the things a medal is supposed to mean, and all the things it can never give back. There is a lie that people tell about valor, and the lie is that it feels like courage. It does not. What it feels like, in the moment, is that there is a thing in front of you that has to be done, and you are the one standing closest to it. That is all heroism has ever been, in my experience. It is just proximity and the refusal to look away. I did not feel brave going back for that dog and that boy. I felt sick, and I felt afraid. And I felt the particular clarity that comes over you when the choices narrow down to exactly one. There was a dog out there who would not leave a body, and I was the senior person present, and going first was the only job I had ever really known how to do. The medal came later, in a clean room, from people who had not been there. The dog came home with me. Only one of those things ever felt like it was mine. In the medical tent afterward, Argo would not let anyone touch him. Not the vet, not the handlers, not the corpsman who wanted to clean his wounds. He had decided, in the way that dogs decide, that the world had narrowed to one safe thing. And the one safe thing was me. When I knelt beside him, he stopped trembling. When I put my hand on his side, he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. The vet looked at the two of us for a long moment, and then he said the thing that would shape the rest of both our lives. "He's chosen you, ma'am," the vet said. "Dogs don't unchoose. You should know that going in." I did not know then everything that sentence would come to mean. I knew only that the dog needed me, and that I had spent my whole life learning that when something worth following needs you, you go first, and you do not put it down. A corpsman near the tent flap, young and quiet, watched Argo press his head into my chest and would not be moved, and he said it softly, almost to himself. He knows exactly who saved him. The Norfolk Officers Club is a low brick building with a long bar and a big stone fireplace. And on the night I walked into it, in plain clothes, with no rank on me anywhere, it was full of operators being loud in the easy way that men are loud when they own a room. I want to be fair to them. They had earned the right to be loud. Most of them had been places and done things that the country will never know about and never thank them for. But there is a particular flavor of confidence that young men in elite units sometimes carry, and that flavor was thick in the air that night. The loudest table belonged to a young SEAL lieutenant named Brant Keller. I did not know his name yet. I knew only that he was 29 or so, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of jaw they put on recruiting posters, and that he had decided, in the way some men decide, that the club was a stage, and he was the lead. He saw me come in. I watched him see me, watched his eyes do the quick arithmetic that men like him do, watched him file me under a heading and close the folder. A woman in her 40s, in a plain coat, alone, no insignia, walking into an operator's bar after midnight. He had the answer before I reached the rail. "Wrong bar, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the room. "Spouse's night is down the hall." His table laughed. Not cruelly, exactly. They laughed the way men laugh at a joke their friend makes that they would not have made themselves. The easy, reflexive laughter of people who have decided in advance to be on a certain side. I felt the old familiar thing settle over me, the thing I have felt in 100 rooms over 28 years, the small, cold recognition of being looked at and not seen. I have learned what to do with that feeling. I learned it slowly and at great cost, and the lesson is this. The truth does not need my help. The truth is not in a hurry. The truth can sit at the end of the bar and order a cup of coffee and wait, because the truth knows something that the loud table does not, which is that it is the truth, and the loud table is going to find that out whether I raise my voice or not. So I did not argue with the lieutenant. I did not show him a card or drop a name or pull rank, which I have always found to be the saddest thing a person with rank can do. I walked to the bar and I caught the bartender's eye and I asked him for a coffee, black. He was an older man, a retired chief by the look of him, and something in his face flickered when he looked at me, some half-memory he could not place. He poured the coffee and slid it across, and I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, and I waited, because waiting was the only thing the moment required of me. That is when the old dog by the fireplace lifted his head. I had not noticed him when I came in. He was lying in the shadow of the big stone hearth, gray from the muzzle halfway up his skull, the way Malinois go gray when they have lived long enough, which most of them never do. He was 13 years old, and he had the scars to prove it, and he had been asleep, or pretending to be, the way old dogs do. But he lifted his head, and he scented the air, and I watched something move through his whole body like a current finding a wire. He stood up. It took him a moment. His back legs do not work the way they used to. But he stood, and he came out of the shadow of the fireplace into the light, and the room began, table by table, to go quiet, because there is something about the way a working dog moves with purpose that makes even men who have seen everything stop and pay attention. He crossed the entire floor. He walked past Keller's table, without a glance. He walked past a dozen of the most dangerous men in the United States military, as if they were furniture. He came the length of that long room straight to me, and he sat down in a perfect heel at my left side, his shoulder against my shin, and he looked up at me with eyes that had gone cloudy at the edges, but had not forgotten one single thing, and the whole bar went silent. I put my hand down on his gray head. My throat closed. 8 years. 8 years since I had filled out the last form that took him away from me, since the regulations that govern these things had decided that a retired military working dog and the officer who carried him out of a kill zone did not get to stay together, that he would go one way and I would go another. 8 years, and he had crossed a crowded room in 15 seconds because he caught my scent on the air. Behind me, a chair scraped. A big man stood up at a table near the wall. 50 years old, a master chief with a chest full of ribbons, he had clearly stopped counting a long time ago. His name was Roy Delgado, and he had been on the ground with me in 2015, though I did not place him until he spoke. He set his glass down on the table very deliberately, and he looked at the young lieutenant, and his voice carried the whole length of the silent room. "That's Captain Sandoval." Delgado said. That was her dog. Downrange. He let it sit for one beat. On your feet, Lieutenant. I have replayed the next few seconds many times. The way the color drained out of Brant Keller's face. The way he stood up so fast that his chair tipped and he had to catch it. The way the easy ownership went out of his shoulders and something else came into them, something younger and far less certain. The way the whole table that had laughed with him now studied the surface of the bar with great interest. I did not say anything. I want you to understand that this is the most important part. I had every word I needed, and I used none of them. I stood there with my hand on the head of a dog who had loved me longer than most people had bothered to, and I let the silence do what no speech of mine could ever do. The lieutenant stood at a clumsy, dawning attention. The room waited, and I just looked at him, and I let him understand, all the way down, exactly how wrong a person can be when he decides he knows the whole story from the cover. The funny thing about being right in a room that was wrong is that there is no pleasure in it. People imagine there is. People imagine the moment of vindication feels like a door swinging open, like a weight coming off. It does not. What it feels like is tired. What it feels like is the same thing it has always felt like, which is being seen at last by people who could have seen you all along if they had bothered to look. Lieutenant Keller found his voice. To his small credit, he did not try to laugh it off. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were." "No," I said, "you didn't." I did not say it to cut him. I said it because it was the truth, and because the truth was the entire point. He had not known who I was. He had decided who I was, which is a different thing, and a more dangerous one, and I wanted him to feel the difference before I let him off the hook. I turned back to the bar and I asked the older bartender, again for my coffee, because in the noise of the dog crossing the room, he had never made it back to me, and the small ordinary act of asking for a cup of coffee a second time did more to settle the room than anything else could have. A young sailor came over to me then, 24 years old, with the slightly stunned look of a man whose understanding of the world has just been rearranged. His name was Eli Trumbo, and he was the one who took care of Argo at the club, fed him and walked him and let him out in the mornings, and in all that time, he told me, nobody had ever told him the old dog's story. They just said he was a retired MWD, Trumbo said, kneeling down to look at Argo, who leaned harder into my leg and did not look at him. Nobody said. "Ma'am, nobody told me he was anybody's." "He was somebody's," I said. "He was a petty officer named Danny Cobbs first. Then he was mine. There was a bad day, and after the bad day, he was mine." Trumbo looked at the dog for a long time. "He never does this," he said. "He likes me fine, but he never crosses the room for anybody. He just lies by the fire and watches the door." "He was watching for the right person," I said, and I found that I had to stop talking for a moment, and Trumbo, to his great credit, let me. Later, back in my room, I called Nadia Brooks. Senior Chief Brooks and I have been friends for 15 years, since she was a second class and I was a brand new lieutenant, and we found ourselves the only two women in a wardroom that did not quite know what to do with either of us. She picked up on the second ring, because she always does, and I told her the whole thing, the coffee and the lieutenant and the dog crossing the floor, and when I was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You don't owe that kid grace, Maeve," she finally said. "You know that, right? Whatever you're already deciding to do, you don't owe it to him." She knows me too well. I was already deciding. "I know," I said. "He humiliated you in front of a room full of operators." "He tried to," I said. "The dog had other ideas." She laughed at that, a short, warm sound. But then she went quiet again, and when she spoke, her voice was gentler. "Did it surprise you?" she asked. "What he said?" And there it was, the real question, the one underneath. Because the honest answer was no. It did not surprise me at all. I have outranked rooms that still looked through me. I have walked into briefings as the senior officer present and been handed someone's coat. I have spent 28 years being the thing people did not expect, and the insult from the lieutenant was not a surprise. The insult from the lieutenant was Tuesday. "No," I told her. "That part didn't surprise me. That part never does. The dog surprised me." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "Nadia, I have spent my whole career being doubted by people who had every reason to know better. And that animal crossed a crowded bar in 15 seconds without a single doubt in his body." after 8 years. He just knew. He always just knew. My voice did something I did not give it permission to do. That's the whole difference right there. That's the entire difference between the people who see you and the people who don't. She let me sit with that. Good friends do. You know what gets me, I said after a while. It is not the ones who are loud about it. The lieutenant tonight, he was loud, but loud is easy to forgive. Loud is just young. What gets me are the quiet ones. The briefing rooms where I am the senior officer present and somebody hands me a coat on the way in and asks me to get the principal a water. The conferences where a junior man assumes I am the note-taker. Nobody is ever cruel. That is the thing. They are not being cruel. They are just so certain about what a person like me must be that they never bother to check, and I have spent my whole career being the correction to a sentence nobody knew they were writing. And the dog, Nadia said quietly. And the dog never wrote the sentence at all, I said. That is what I can't get over tonight. Every human being in that room had to be told who I was. They needed a master chief to stand up and say my rank out loud before they would rearrange their faces. The dog needed nothing. The dog had one piece of information, which was the truth, and he crossed a room full of operators to get to it. We spend our whole lives building rank and record and reputation so that people will finally see us. And an animal with a gray muzzle and bad hips saw me clearer than any of it, with none of it, in 15 seconds. I rubbed my eyes. I am tired, Nadia. Not tonight tired. The other kind. I know, she said. I know you are. And because she is the friend she is, she did not try to fix it. She just stayed on the line with me in the dark. Two women who had spent a combined 50 years being the thing the room did not expect, until the tired thing in my chest loosened enough that I could sleep. On the walk back from the club, the staff had done a thing I will always be grateful for. They had let Argo come with me, just for the night, an old dog and the woman he had crossed a room for, walking together across a dark and quiet base. He matched my stride the way he always had, a half step off my left heel. Slower now, but there, always there, as if the 8 years had been a single long night and he had simply been waiting for me to come back from a patrol. I did not hurry him. We had nowhere to be. I had the biggest morning of my life in front of me and an old dog beside me. And for the length of that walk, the morning could wait. Morning came the way it always does, indifferent to everything that happened the night before. I put on the service dress with the 4 gold stripes. I put the 2 medals on, for once, because a change of command is the one day you wear the whole record, whether you like it or not. And I stood in a base hall in front of a flag and a formation and accepted command of a naval special warfare group from Rear Admiral Curtis Mayhew, a lean gray man who had known me since I was a lieutenant and had never once looked through me. The group is yours, Captain, he said quietly, while the formation held at attention and the official words did their official work. They could not have a better one. Go take care of them. He had known me since I was a lieutenant, and he had never once handed me a coat or asked me to fetch a water or looked through me on his way to a man he assumed mattered more. I have never forgotten that about Curtis Mayhew. In a long career full of people who needed to be told who I was, he was one of the few who simply knew and treated me accordingly from the first day to that one. It is a small thing to give a person. It costs nothing, and it is rarer than you would ever believe. I took the group, and then, an hour later, sitting at the desk that was now mine, going through the roster of the people I was now responsible for, I came to a name that made me set down my coffee. Lieutenant Brant Keller. He was mine now. The young man who had told me the spouse's night was down the hall was, as of 0800 that morning, under my command. I sat there and I looked at his name and I understood that the universe had handed me something that very few people who are publicly disrespected ever get, which is total power over the person who did it. I could end him. Not with cruelty, not with anything anyone could ever call unfair, just with the ordinary machinery of a career, a word here, a fitness report there, a quiet decision that this officer was not going far. No one would have blamed me. Brooks had all but told me to do it. He had earned it. I did not do it. I called him into my office that afternoon. He came in braced for the firing squad, and I watched him decide in the doorway to take it like a man, whatever it was going to be. I did not yell. I have never found yelling to be a tool that does anything but make the person yelling feel better, and I was not interested in feeling better. "Sit down, Lieutenant," I said. He sat. "Last night you looked at a woman in a coat and you decided you knew everything about her. You decided she was a lost wife who had wandered into the wrong room. You said it loud in front of your team because being right in front of your team felt good. I let that sit. Here is the problem. In our line of work, the habit of looking at a person and deciding you already know the whole story is not a personality flaw. It is a way to get people killed. The day you decide you have read a situation correctly because it looks the way you expect it to look is the day the situation that does not look the way you expect kills somebody you are responsible for." He did not say anything. He was listening, which was more than I expected. "I'm not going to bury you," I said, and I watched the surprise move across his face. "You probably think I should. My senior chief thinks I should. But I'm not going to give you a sentence. I'm going to give you a standard. You are going to be, from this morning on, the officer in this group who reads people most carefully and judges them most slowly. You are going to earn back what you spent last night, and you are going to do it where I can see it. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. And then, because he was apparently braver than I had given him credit for, he added, "Why, ma'am, why not just bury me? You'd be right to." I thought about Danny Cobb. I thought about a vet in a medical tent telling me that dogs do not unchoose. I thought about my father at a kitchen table, certain that the uniform was for a different kind of person, and how close I had come to believing him. "Because somebody decided who I was, once, a long time ago, and was wrong," I said. "And I have spent my whole life being grateful for every single person who gave me the chance to prove it. I'm not going to be the one who refuses to pass that along. Now get out of my office and go be better." He left not destroyed, but measured, carrying the harder weight of a second chance he had not earned and now had to. The thing about a moment like the one in the club is that it does not stay in the club. By the end of that first week, everyone in the group knew the story. They knew about the coffee and the lieutenant and the old dog who crossed the room, and they knew that the lieutenant was now in the captain's command, and they were all, every one of them, waiting to see the hammer come down. People love a reckoning. There is a part of all of us that wants to watch the arrogant get what is coming to them. The hammer did not come down, and that confused people more than any punishment could have. Keller's reputation cracked, but I did not crack it. The room cracked it. His own peers, the men who had laughed with him that night, were the ones who would not let it go. They needled him about it in the way that operators needle each other, which is to say without mercy and without end. Somebody would walk past him in the gym and mutter that spouse's night was down the hall. Somebody taped a picture of a Belgian Malinois to his locker. He had to sit in it, day after day, the social consequence of having been seen by the whole room in a moment he could not take back. I did not have to lift a finger. I had learned a long time ago that you very rarely have to punish people who have humiliated themselves. You just have to let them live in the world they made. But here is the part I did not expect. Keller did not get bitter. I have seen men get bitter under far less. He got quiet, and then he got serious. And somewhere in there, he started getting better. It came to a head on a training evolution about 3 weeks in. I was observing. Keller's element was running a scenario, and the scenario had a wrinkle in it, the way good scenarios do, a person who was not what they appeared to be. And I watched Lieutenant Brant Keller, who 3 weeks earlier had decided he knew exactly who I was from, across a bar, slow down. I watched him not take the obvious read. I watched him look twice at the thing that looked simple and find the complication underneath it and handle it correctly while half his peers were still running on assumption. When the evolution ended, he did not look at me for approval. He just did the job and moved on to the next thing, which is the surest sign there is that a lesson has gone all the way in. I did not say anything to him about it. You do not need to. When a person is actually changing, the worst thing you can do is make a ceremony of it. I have thought a great deal over the years about why I did not bury Brant Keller when I had every right and every opportunity. I have turned it over the way you turn over a stone, looking at all the sides of it. The easy answer is that I am a forgiving person, but that is not quite true. I am not especially forgiving. I have held grudges that have outlived the people who earned them. The truer answer is that I have spent my whole life on the receiving end of people deciding who I was. And I know exactly what it does to a person to be reduced to someone else's certainty. I know the particular cold of it. And I had discovered, sitting at my new desk with the power to do to Keller what so many people had done to me, that I did not want it. The power to diminish a person turns out to be a much smaller thing than people think it is. It does not feel like strength. It feels like becoming the very thing that hurt you. There is an old idea that the best revenge is living well. I have never found that quite right either. The best revenge, the only one I have ever found that does not curdle, is refusing to pass the wound along. My father passed me a small wound across a kitchen table, not meaning to, and I could have spent my life passing it to everyone who reminded me of it. Instead, I had a difficult shepherd and a brilliant Malinois and a string of young sailors like Danny Cobb who needed someone to go first for them, and somewhere in all of that, I decided that the wound stopped with me. Keller was just one more chance to keep that promise. While all of that was happening, while the whole group held its breath, waiting to see what I would do to a lieutenant, I was quietly doing the only thing that actually mattered to me. I was filling out a form to take a tired old dog home. Argo was 13, and 13 is ancient for a Malinois, and he was slowing down in the way that breaks your heart precisely because it is so gentle. He could not get up the way he used to. He slept more. The club staff and young Trumbo had been good to him, better than good. But a club is not a home, and a dog who has given everything he has to the people who wore the uniform deserves, at the end, to belong to exactly one person again. I went to see the base veterinarian, and I went to see the people who handle the paperwork for retired working dogs, and I made myself a small but determined nuisance until the forms were signed. The day I brought him home, he climbed into the back of my truck on the third try. His back legs failed him twice, and on the third attempt, I got a hand under him and he made it. And he turned around once and lay down on the old blanket I had put back there for him. And he let out a long breath and settled like he had been waiting 8 years for the ride. Which I suppose he had. I want to tell you about the months that followed, because they are the reason this is not a sad story, no matter how it sounds. Brant Keller came to see me one afternoon, and he did not come to apologize again, which I appreciated because the apology had been made, and remaking it would have been about him and not about me. He came to ask me how to be better at the thing he had failed at. He sat across from my desk, this big, confident young seal, and he said the thing that told me he was going to be all right. "I keep thinking about how fast I decided I knew who you were," he said. 15 seconds. Less. I had the whole thing figured out before you got to the bar. And I was completely wrong, and I would have gone my whole life never knowing how wrong if that dog hadn't gotten up. I don't want to be that guy, ma'am. I don't know how to not be that guy. Then don't be, I said. It really is that simple, and that hard. You slow down, you look twice. You let people show you who they are instead of telling yourself who they are. That's the whole job. I stood up. Come with me. There's something I want you to be a part of, and somebody I want you to meet, and you owe him an apology too, as it happens. I put Keller to work on the unit's working dog program. It was a small thing, an administrative thing, the kind of additional duty that nobody wants. But it was the world I had come from, the world that had taught me everything I knew about leading things that cannot be ordered to follow you, and I wanted him in it. I wanted the man who had read a person wrong from across a room to spend his time around animals that cannot be fooled, that read you correctly every single time, that do not care what you look like or what you are wearing or what folder they could file you under. I took him to meet Argo. The old dog was lying in the sun on my back porch by then, and he watched Keller come up the steps with the flat, patient assessment that working dogs give to strangers. Keller stopped at the top of the steps, and to his credit, he did not reach out, did not do the thing that confident men do, where they assume every dog will love them. He knelt down a respectful distance away, and he waited. "This is Argo," I said. 8 years ago, I carried him out of a place neither of us should have walked away from. His handler didn't, a petty officer named Danny Cobb, 22 years old. The best young sailor I ever knew. He told me this dog was smarter than he was, and he was right. Keller was very still. "Argo's going to decide whether he trusts you," I said. "He doesn't care that you're a lieutenant. He doesn't care that you're a SEAL. He's going to watch what you do and ignore everything else, which is, when you think about it, the only fair way anyone's ever judged anybody. I want to say something here about the working dog program, because it became the unlikely heart of everything that happened after. It was, on paper, a thankless additional duty, a folder of vaccination records and training schedules, and the slow grind of getting kennels repaired on a budget that nobody wanted to spend. But for Keller, it became something else. He threw himself into it the way that young men throw themselves into the first thing that ever genuinely humbles them. He learned the handlers' names. He learned the dogs' names faster. He started spending his off hours at the kennels, not because anyone told him to, but because I think he had discovered the same thing I had discovered at 20, which is that there is a kind of peace in the company of an animal that cannot be impressed and cannot be fooled and does not care in the slightest what you think of yourself. The handlers, who had every reason to resent a SEAL officer being parked on their program as a punishment, came around to him faster than I expected. Partly that was Keller doing the unglamorous work without complaint, but partly it was the dogs. The dogs liked him eventually, once he learned to slow down and let them come to him. And there is no faster way to earn the trust of a kennel full of handlers than to earn the trust of their animals. I watched a young man who had built his whole identity on being the most impressive person in the room learn to sit still on a concrete floor and wait to be approved of by a creature that owed him nothing. It is the best thing I ever watched happen to anyone under my command. Keller knelt there in the sun and waited to be judged the way the dog judged, by what he did and not how he looked. And after a while, Argo got up, slow and stiff, and crossed the porch and sniffed his outstretched hand and decided he was acceptable. I watched something happen in Keller's face that I have seen happen in a lot of faces over the years, the particular humility of being accepted by an animal that owed you nothing. It is good for people. It is especially good for people who are used to being deferred to. A few weeks later, I overheard him with a junior sailor who had made some dismissive comment about somebody, written somebody off on sight, the way we all do. And I heard Keller, without any idea I was listening, say, "Hey, slow down. You don't know that. You looked at the guy for 2 seconds and decided you had him. That's how you miss things." He said it in his own words, not mine, which is the only way a lesson ever really belongs to a person. I kept walking. I did not let him see me hear it, but I carried it with me for the rest of the day, warm in my chest, the proof that I had been right not to bury him. Summer came and Argo had a good summer. I want to dwell on that because the world is full of stories about the bad day and far fewer about the good months that a little stubbornness can buy. He lived at my house, in the sun, on the blankets, riding shotgun on the quiet back roads with his gray muzzle out the window and his cloudy eyes half closed in pure contentment. The unit held a small, unofficial gathering for him one Saturday. Nothing formal, just the people who had come to know his story. And even Keller was there, sitting on the grass with the old dog's head in his lap. And I thought, not for the first time, that the night in the club had given me far more than it had cost me. But 13 turning 14 is 13 turning 14. And there came a hard afternoon at the veterinary clinic when the doctor told me, as kindly as a person can tell you such a thing, that Argo's time was getting short. I sat down on the clinic floor with him, the way I had sat down beside him in a medical tent 11 years before, and I put my hand on his side and felt him let out the same long breath he had let out then. The breath of a dog who has decided that the world has narrowed to one safe thing, and the one safe thing is here. Everyone in that bar learned my rank that night, I told the vet, though I was really talking to the dog. Every one of them. They'll all remember that I'm a captain. I scratched the old gray ears. Only the dog ever knew my name. The vet, who was a kind man, asked me gently if it was time. "Not yet," I said. "Give us the autumn. He gave me a lot more than that." He gave us the autumn. I rearranged what I could of my life to be home more, which is not a small thing for a group commander, but I have buried enough people and enough dogs to know that the work will always be there, and the warm light will not. We developed a routine, the two of us. Coffee on the porch in the morning while the base woke up across the water. A slow walk to the end of the road and back, slower every week, but his nose still working, still reading the wind, still finding the world more interesting than I will ever manage to. In the evenings, he would put his gray head on my foot while I read through the endless paper of command, and every so often I would look down at him and find him already looking up at me. And we would sit there in the old comfortable silence that we had learned in a medical tent a long way away. People who do not love animals do not understand what an old dog gives you. They think it is sad, the graying, the slowing, the long goodbye. And it is sad, but it is also the most honest relationship most of us will ever have. Because there is nothing in it but the truth. The dog does not love you for your rank or want anything from your career. The dog has no opinion about whether you belong in the wardroom. The dog simply decided, once, that you were worth following, and then kept deciding it, every day, in the cold and the dark, until his body would not let him follow anymore. And on the drive home from that appointment, with Argo's head resting on my thigh and the windows down, and the first cool air of the changing season coming in off the water, I made myself a promise that I was not going to call any of this an ending. I was going to call it the part where the debt finally gets paid in full. Because that is what it was. For 8 years I had owed an old dog a home and a hand, and a person of his own, and I was finally getting to pay it. That same week I did the other thing I'd been putting off for 11 years. I sat down and I wrote a letter to Danny Cobb's mother. I told her where her son's dog had gone. I told her that Argo had been loved, that he had crossed a crowded room for me on an ordinary night, that he had spent his last good months in the sun on my back porch, that he had been, until the very end, somebody's. I told her that her son had been the best young sailor I ever knew, and that he had been right about everything that mattered, and that I thought about him more than she could know. I do not know what that letter cost her to read. I know what it cost me to write. I know it was the last thread, finally pulled closed, between the worst day of my life and the gentlest months of it. So here is what I want to tell you, now that you have the whole of it. Argo had a good autumn. He walked the beach with me in the long gold light of the end of the year, slow but content, stopping to put his nose into the wind the way he always had, reading a world that the rest of us only look at. And when his last day came, it came gently, on the porch in the warm light, surrounded by people who had finally learned his worth. With my hand on his side, and my voice in his ear, telling him he was a good dog, the best dog, telling him to go on ahead and that I would be along. He had crossed a crowded room for me once. I like to think he would cross one more. If you have ever walked into a room that decided who you were before you spoke, I want you to hear this part because it took me almost 3 decades and an old dog to learn it. You do not have to win that room. You do not have to pull out the card or drop the name or raise your voice. You just have to be who you are, quietly and completely, and wait for the ones who already know. They are out there. They are always out there. Sometimes they are wearing a chest full of ribbons and they stand up and say your name. And sometimes they are lying by a fireplace with a gray muzzle, and they have been waiting 8 years for your scent on the air, and they will cross a crowded bar in 15 seconds to sit at your feet because they never had a single doubt about you. Not once, not ever, in their whole loyal life. A young lieutenant found out who I was that night, and it took him about 3 seconds after the dog got up. It took my own father most of my life, and I'm not sure he ever fully managed it before he passed. But that dog found me across a crowded bar in 15 seconds flat, after 8 years apart, with nothing to go on but the truth. So that is the only advice I have. After all of it, be the kind of person a good dog would cross a room for. Be worth following when no one is watching and there is nothing in it for the one who follows. Earn it in the cold and the dark and keep earning it, and let the loud tables say what they want. The rest of it sorts itself out. I promise you it does. I sit on my porch now in the last warm light of the year, with an empty leash folded in my lap and a fullness in my chest that I do not have a better word for than peace. People ask me sometimes when they hear the story whether I ever got my revenge on the lieutenant who laughed at me, and I tell them the truth, which is that I never wanted any. The best revenge I ever took, the only one that ever meant anything, was simply this. I became the woman that the dog always knew I was. And he got to see it. He got to come home. And in the end, that was the whole of it, and it was more than enough. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. Argo crossed a crowded room for me on a night when a whole bar full of people could not see who I was, and I think about that more than I think about any medal I was ever handed. So let me ask you a few things. Have you ever been seen clearly by an animal who loved you, at a time when the people around you would not look? Have you ever been written off the way that lieutenant wrote me off, and what did you decide to do with it? And if you had been sitting in my chair the next morning with that young man suddenly under your command, would you have buried him or given him the chance I gave him? I would love to read your answer in the comments. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while. I read every comment you leave.